Assalamualaikum everyone. Thank you for joining our Know Your Rights series. Today we are in conversation with Amanda J. Schneider and Hopi Fink from Legal Services of Eastern Missouri and Education Justice Program, and our very own board member, Huma Shah.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our latest Know Your Rights event. We are so excited to have Hopi and Amanda here with us, and I am going to turn it over to them. Just before you guys start, if you could give us just a brief overview of what the Education Justice Program is, that would be great.
Sure, and we actually have some slides for that, so if you don't mind, I can just start sharing.
Yes, that would be great.
But while I do that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Hopi Fink. I'm a staff attorney in our Education Justice Program, and then I'll let Amanda introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Schneider, and I am the managing attorney of our Education Justice Program at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. And we'll be talking about rights around bullying, harassment, and discrimination in schools. And Hopi, take it away.
Sure. So we were going to just first introduce our program a little bit, situate the work that we're doing in the context of our larger organization as well. So hopefully that answers the intro you were hoping for. And then we're going to discuss bullying and harassment, kind of defining some terms and getting into the nuts and bolts of what those words mean and how they affect students in Missouri. We will then discuss legal protections for students and for parents related to bullying and harassment, go into some tips for families and FAQs, and then we'll have time for questions if there are any that come up. So without further ado, Legal Services of Eastern Missouri serves low-income individuals in 21 counties in Eastern Missouri. So here's our service area. Our program, the Education Justice Program, actually does more statewide work, but we are part of an organization, Legal Services, that serves many clients in a lot of different service areas. And so all of our civil legal assistance is free. And we also have social workers on staff who provide social work services for all of our legal clients. This next slide has all of our programs. So as you can see, they really run the gamut from, public benefits assistance to housing law. We have several different programs that work with families, whether that's helping them connect with health coverage or advocating in the education space with our Children's Legal Alliance and with our program, the Education Justice Program. So we just wanted to kind of preview or put out there all the other great work that our colleagues do. And of course, a lot of these issue areas can overlap a little bit, but just so you know, these are all the programs that we have at Legal Services. And we'll have our contact info at the end as well. There's a general intake line. We do have some income eligibility requirements and a whole intake process. And then our program has a separate hotline as well that we can give the number for education issues. So the Education Justice Program started about 5 years ago, and we target the root causes of education inequity in Missouri by using a racial justice lens and a community lawyering model. And our focus is really on systemic change. So a lot of the work that we do goes beyond, individual representation, although we do that as part of our work. We also do impact litigation and other community lawyering impact strategies that might include policy papers and analysis or other ways of working with community partners and doing community outreach and education, just like this, Know Your Rights presentations. And then we do have a social worker as well who provides social work for our clients and their families. And Amanda, feel free to jump in at any point. So just a little bit of an overview of what that community lawyering looks like day to day, because it is kind of a unique model. We're not just doing legal research and writing. We're also really trying to connect with community. That's the essence of what we do, to try to really understand what problems are affecting our clients. And so that's students and their parents as well. And so we do that through a number of ways that are on this slide here. We've had to be kind of creative during COVID, but generally we do a lot of community meetings and forums. We do one-on-ones and listening sessions, and like I said, know your rights presentations, really anything that we can to understand what's happening on the ground. And some of the traditional areas of focus for our program are these on this slide. Really, we are all about helping keep kids in school and helping get them a quality education. So a lot of our work revolves around access to education, whether that is the right to alternative education for students who have been removed from the classroom through suspension or expulsion, as well as access for students experiencing homelessness and students in foster care, other groups of students who have legal rights that we want to make sure districts are following through with. We also do a lot of work around school discipline and really disrupting the school to prison pipeline. This is, an important issue of race equity to ensure that all students have that right to education and that discipline is not increasing disparities. So there's a lot we could cover. We have a lot of different focus areas. And so one that comes up so often, and it's really often at the intersecting with these other issues that we work on, is bullying and harassment. Many of the calls that we get from families have to do on some level with a bullying issue or harassment issue. And so I will just preview that we have a guide that we have developed that I believe we're going to drop a link to. So hopefully that, along with this presentation, can help you get started to understand your rights better in this area. I will say we don't take on a lot of individual cases in this area, but we will still provide our hotline number, and we also have a referral list that we work closely with other attorneys in the private bar and with other advocates. So we're happy to connect folks as well. Amanda, I don't know if you had anything to add before we jump into this next section. Okay, so, oops. So Missouri law defines bullying in section 160.775 of the Missouri statutes. And every part of this definition is important. So that's why we've kind of bolded out the ands and the ors, because what the definition is in the statute is intimidation, unwanted aggressive behavior, or harassment. That's one part. It also has to be repetitive or substantially likely to be repeated, and has to either cause a reasonable student to fear for their personal safety or property, or substantially interfere with the educational performance, opportunities, or benefits of any student, or substantially disrupt the orderly operation of the school. So this is a very lawyerly definition. A lot of these terms are legal terms of art. I think a lot of us have a kind of an intuitive sense of what bullying is from, either our own experience or, engaging in media. And it's this legal definition is helpful because if ever, you were looking for legal recourse, this is what would be looked to. But I think when we're looking at each of these parts, you can probably think about a broad swath of situations that might fit into this definition. But the one thing to highlight is this repetitive or substantially likely to be repeated part. That is significant, and it's why later on we'll say that it's important to really document every instance that your child is experiencing. And that's really, again, this rooted in this definition that's in Missouri law. But what that can look like from day to day could be again, a lot of different things. That could be physical actions, not just like a push or a shove, but also a hand gesture or something that is, physically being done. Also often is words, oral or electronic communication. And the next slide is going to talk a little bit about what cyberbullying is in particular, because that is something that has increased a lot, unfortunately, in recent years. And bullying also encompasses any threat of retaliation for reporting on these behaviors or actions. So that is something to take note of as well. Cyberbullying is a specific term that is used for any bullying that fits that definition when it's done over an electronic device. So I think we all can think of situations where a student might be texting or on the internet, and words or images that are exchanged there can also be considered bullying. And this is an evolving area of law. So we wanted to highlight that there's a recent Supreme Court case, this Mahanoy area school district versus BL, that dealt with this question of when a school district can discipline student speech when it's off campus, when it's happening, electronically, and the student is physically off campus. So in that case, there was, this question of, is the Supreme Court going to create a rule? They didn't really. So this is still kind of unclear, some of the exact boundaries of what the law entails when a student is off campus and there's cyberbullying involved. But, for the purposes of what we're wanting parents and students to know that bullying can look like a lot of different things, not just, those physical actions. And so taking note of cyberbullying and anything that is happening with words or online is also important. Harassment and bullying are often used interchangeably. They can be. And there's kind of some nuanced differences legally between these two terms. Actually, you can notice that in that previous definition we gave for bullying, harassment is one way that bullying can manifest. But there's a more specific federal definition of harassment that is used in several different laws that we'll go over. But according to the Office for Civil Rights, harassment is treatment that causes a hostile environment that is so severe, pervasive, or persistent that it interferes with or limits a student's ability to participate in or benefit from the services, activities, or opportunities offered by a school. And the other component to harassment is that this is a legal term that's used when a student is being targeted because they are a member of what's called a protected class. So we'll go over what that could look like, but it's goes a little more specific than a general bullying, and it's if a student is really being singled out because of their membership in a group or because of their identity in some way. We wanted to provide this slide just to ground this, this discussion in how prevalent this is. So nationally, 15.7% of high school students report being cyberbullied, and even more, almost 20% of high school students were reported being bullied on school property. This is based on the 2019 report, so that was pre-pandemic. We all know that a lot has shifted in the education landscape in the last couple of years. So these numbers could even be different or higher now. In Missouri, there's even a slightly higher percentage reporting than nationally. This is really a fifth of all students report being experiencing bullying. And even though these statistics are for high schoolers, this can also affect even younger students in middle school and elementary school. It's not like this term only applies to high schoolers. And also it's key to note that this can be experienced from peers, like other students, and also from school staff. And there actually are some different legal protections kind of depending on who it is, who is the aggressor in this situation. And it sort of goes without saying, but there is a lot of research on how bullying can affect students, bullying and harassment. It's been found that students who experience bullying are more likely to do worse academically in school, to miss school, and to feel alienated or depressed. So there are not just mental health concerns that can happen, but very real education related concerns that happen too. So that's in part why this is an important education issue, not just because it's happening at school, but because it also affects students' ability to succeed in school. And it's also a race equity issue, which is again why our program is really interested in working to combat racial inequities in Missouri in education. And this is an issue in part because a lot of students report being bullied because of their race. And this can really increase a lot of the other disparities that are facing students of color. And there's this statistic from the 2016 to 2017 and 2017-2018 school years, again, pre-pandemic, so this could be, even more now. But there was a sharper increase in bullying in that time frame for students of color compared to white students. And there are a lot of statistics kind of that can that are interesting to look at with each of these kind of last couple of slides about the effects of bullying and who it impacts. And in the next part of the presentation, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what the legal protections are. And we wanted to focus on laws that are perhaps relevant to CAIR-Missouri and to all of the members that you have. And so this isn't like covering every single thing that we could say, because there are additional legal protections for other considerations. But generally, I talked about the word protected class in the context of harassment. So harassment, again, is a specific legal term that may be experienced when there is a hostile environment that is basically preventing a student from getting the benefit of their education, when it is happening because of a student's membership or perceived membership in one of these categories. So that means the perceived part is important, because not just if a student actually does belong to one of these protected class categories, but even if someone just thinks they do and treats them accordingly, then that is also protected under a lot of federal and state laws. So there are different laws that protect students from discrimination based on race, color, national origin, ancestry, again, or perceived any of that, as well as religion, sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, and disability. So a big one that we want to focus on is harassment based on race and national origin. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits harassment based on race and national origin. And the Office for Civil Rights is a division in the Department of Education that is basically tasked with enforcing Title VI. And so the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, when they are investigating an incident where there is alleged harassment based on race, there are sort of two two different ways they would look at that situation to determine whether there is harassment. One is called different treatment. And in that situation, harassment violates federal law when there is racially based conduct that has such an effect and that consists of different treatment of students on the basis of race by the employees of agencies that receive federal funds. So like a school. So this law covers more than just schools. It's actually important to say, but in the context of school, what the law really says is that an entity that's getting money from the federal government, which school districts do, can't discriminate based on race or national origin. And so because employees like teachers and principals and other school staff are, they're kind of considered to be acting like on behalf of the school, if that different treatment is coming directly from an employee, then it would meet this different treatment definition under federal law and constitute harassment based on race. There's another kind of more complicated situation, but probably more common, which is hostile environment. And so in that situation, it's not like the staff person themselves is necessarily the one that is doing the direct different treatment. So like, I think an example of like different treatment, just to back up for a second, would be if, you know, a teacher decides that they're going to separate students out based on race, and they're going to give one category of students one thing and a different thing to another category. That's very clearly violating Title VI. The hostile environment situation more often happens when another student perhaps is creating a hostile environment, which again is basically something that is preventing a student from getting the benefit of their education. And the school knows about it, or they should know about it, and they don't act appropriately to respond to that. So if and that's again what we're going to talk about in tips for families is why it's important to report when there is bullying or harassment that's happening, because once a district hears about that, like if the student or the parent reports it, then they have an obligation to address it. Otherwise, the school is creating that hostile environment and letting it happen, and that would violate Title VI.
Just a quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is there like a timeline to reporting?
We'll get to kind of suggested timeline, and then also when the district is supposed to respond as well. Yeah. I mean, for what parents should know is, you know, as soon as you know about a situation, you should report. That's just good general advice, but we'll get into that as well in more detail. So again, so Title VI covers race and national origin harassment. It doesn't actually explicitly directly cover harassment based on religion, but like I was saying about how there can be, you know, perceived associations though between some of these concepts. And so if harassment based on religion also involves racial, ethnic, or national origin discrimination, that would be covered under Title VI. So those same standards on that previous slide would apply. So this is just an example that the Office for Civil Rights actually gave about how this kind of can intersect a little bit. So for example, during a lesson about 9/11, classmates of a Muslim middle school student call him a terrorist and tell him to go back to his country. The teacher tells the class that only some Muslims are terrorists and asks the student why Muslims have not denounced the terrorist attacks of 9/11. The student complains to a school official about the statements by his teacher and classmates, but the school official takes no steps to respond. This is a violation of Title VI. So in this instance, there's discrimination based on religion happening, that's also being conflated with national origin, perceived racial and ethnic associations as well, which unfortunately was, of course, very common after 9/11 and continues to be an issue today, with kind of how those things intersect in people's minds. And so because this involves that discrimination that is prohibited by Title VI, it would still be covered. And so in this instance, there's not just different treatment, because you can see that the student, or that the teacher who is employed by the school is directly asking the students to denounce something that the student has no control over, of course, based on this perceived racial, ethnic, national origin discrimination. So that's different treatment, but this also could be a hostile environment situation because the school official knows about it, was reported, and they didn't take any action. So this is just an example of how some of those things can intersect in Title VI. There are additional protections, though, against discrimination on the basis of religion. So one of the most, the most obvious ones is the U.S. Constitution, First Amendment, which not only says that public schools, or it doesn't say this, but it's been interpreted to mean that public schools can't prevent students from expressing or sharing their religious beliefs, as long as doing that doesn't disrupt the school. There's a lot of different cases that talk about those nuances. And also there's the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which says that public schools, as kind of entities of the government, cannot establish one religion or any religion. So that's where the concept of separation of church and state also comes into play. Beyond the Constitution, there are additional statutes, federal and state laws, that also protect freedom of religion and freedom from discrimination on the basis of religion. So for example, the Equal Access Act is a federal law that allows student religious groups at a federally funded public high school to have the same ability to use school facilities as other student groups. So if there is like a Muslim Students Association, they have the same right to use the facilities as like the drama club or something. And in addition, Title IV of the Civil Rights Act allows the Attorney General of the United States to address equal protection violations based on religion in public schools. And it also establishes the Equal Opportunity Section, which works to ensure that everyone is provided equal educational opportunities regardless of their religion. In addition, the Missouri Constitution has a protection as well for religion. So Missouri citizens can express their religious beliefs, and that right can't be infringed. It actually also does say that school children have the right to pray and acknowledge God voluntarily in their public schools. So that is in the Missouri Constitution. So there are probably even more like laws that could be interpreted to create these protections as well. So hopefully this gives a good overview, though, that there are a lot of protections for students if they are experiencing harassment or bullying on the basis of religion, perceived religion, or any intersection with race or national origin. And like we said a couple slides ago, there are protections for students based on disability, sex. There's other categories as well that have their own sort of nuanced rules as well. So for all of these laws that we're talking about, courts have interpreted the exact contours of what schools are and are not allowed to do. and sort of the extent of students' rights, kind of like when we were talking about cyberbullying, how that law is still evolving, where the line between when a district is able to infringe on a student's speech when it's off campus is still sort of unclear. For a lot of these areas, when you get into the really nuanced details, there can be law that's still evolving as well. So we, are happy to kind of answer questions. Generally, we aren't able to give general or to give specific legal advice, but hopefully this can get you thinking in what those rights are. Amanda, do you have anything to add on any of this? Okay. So this is getting into the question that you talked about, because Missouri does require school districts to implement anti-bullying policies. So that's that same statute that defines the word bullying. And in the statute, all of this is spelled out in the statute as a requirement. At the very least, those policies have to include a requirement that school district employees report bullying that they know of firsthand, and that has to happen within 2 days. So if you as the parent, or if your child reports to not just a principal or anyone, to a teacher, a counselor, a janitor, anyone who's employed by the school, within 2 days, they have to report it up to the next in the chain. So the policy also, and who that is dependent on how the district writes its policy. You'll see on the next slide, they have to have procedures. They also have to have a statement that bans retaliation against people who report bullying, and a process for how to talk about the policy with their students and how to train their staff.
Hopi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but where would these anti-bullying policies be contained? Are they on the website? Are they in a handbook? Where can parents look for this?
Yeah, good question. So they are usually in the handbook. Amanda, do you know if it has to be in the handbook, like in the code of conduct?
I don't think it has to be anywhere. They just have to have this policy, but often we see them in handbooks. But if not in a handbook, online as part of the board policies that someone can look up about their school district.
Okay, so if a parent wants to understand what their school district's policy is on bullying, go to the school website. That's probably the best source.
Yeah, I would really start. You can Google it, and either usually the handbook would come up, or like Amanda said, all districts have to put all of their policies in a publicly accessible place. And so usually they have a website where you can, it's like board docs. Usually you can pull up the exact policy and search for it. And that would be a good place to start as well, especially if you can't find it in the handbook.
Right.
And we actually, in our bullying and harassment guide that we can provide a link to, have for the city and for the county in St. Louis, links to board policies for nearly every district. So that not only includes this anti-bullying policy, but also a policy on harassment if a school district has a different policy on harassment. It includes contacts for who to reach out to if there are concerns, which we'll talk about shortly too.
Great.
Yeah. And again, in that policy, there have to be procedures for investigating bullying. So a staff person, again, has to report within 2 school days. And then when the school principal hears, they have to also within two school days start an investigation. Then that timeline is 10 days from the start of that investigation, or from the date of the report, sorry. The investigation has to be completed unless there's good cause to extend, and that should be written if there is good cause, given and explained to the family. And also in our bullying guide that Amanda was just talking about, we do have a list of the designated staff person for each district as well, because that is required under Missouri law, that there is someone in the school district who is designated to receive those reports of bullying.
Just a quick question. When the school investigates the bullying and they issue a report, does that report have to be in writing?
Amanda, what would you say?
I mean, if I were the district's lawyer, I would want it to all be in writing to prove that it happened, to prove that I followed these steps that the law requires me to. But I don't know if it says anywhere it has to be in writing, but I would presume that in order to prove that all these steps have been taken, that the incidents have been investigated, that it would be, and that it would likely be a part of that child's educational record as well.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind too.
And it might say in your school district's policy, their policy might be that it is in writing. So that's another thing.
Would it be reasonable for a parent to say, you know, whatever you come up with, we want it in writing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. In fact, we would advise that. And we're about to get to some tips for families. But first, what a district has to do once this is kind of what the investigation has to look like. So once harassment is brought to the attention of the school district, or when they know or should have known about the harassment. So that's either when they get a report from a parent or a student, or, I mean, sometimes a teacher witnesses it themselves, you know, and they should know. Schools have to take immediate and appropriate action, again, with those timelines of 2 days and then the 10 days for the investigation to investigate what happened. So it has to be prompt, thorough, and impartial, which is important. And if the school's investigation finds that there was harassment, then they have to stop the harassment, stop any hostile environment, make sure that the person who reported the harassment and the person who experienced harassment, sometimes that's the same person, but not always, and both of them have protections against retaliation that the school district has an obligation to make sure. And also the school district needs to make sure that students know how to report any future problems and to prevent future harassment. So depending on the situation, a school might need to also provide training to whoever it was who instigated the harassment, and sometimes to the entire school. If you know there's maybe a pervasive issue that's happening, they may want to consider that. Sometimes they also might provide services to the student who experienced that harassment, which could look like counseling or some other service that the student might need for support. And a district might also need to update its policy about bullying. So I will turn it over to Amanda for some tips.
Thanks, Hopi. So within our bullying and harassment guide, what we try to do is set out in really clear terms, you know, how to navigate these processes, and how to think about, you know, if my child is experiencing bullying or harassment, what do I do? I think we've been pretty clear it's important to act as quickly as possible, really to put the district on notice if there are concerns, you know, that could be affecting your child. I mean, it could be really affecting, as we stated earlier, it could be affecting their mental health. It could really be impacting, you know, educational performance. Sometimes the hardest thing though is to, you know, figure out what is going on. So as best you can, understanding, you know, how to recognize the signs that your child may even be experiencing bullying and harassment is important. And so as much as you can talk to them about what's going on, what are the expectations for what is and is not okay about how you should be treated, is really important. And of course, if they come to you, or if they even just go to a teacher, maybe they don't go to you first, maybe they go to a teacher, so you're hearing about it from a teacher. Instead, really following through and looking at the big picture of trying to figure out what's going on, I think is really important. And some of those examples we include on this slide, But of course, this is not an exhaustive list. It can look like a lot of different things depending on your child. So signs could include the student reporting that a teacher or classmate is being mean to them, calling them names or making them feel uncomfortable about a certain thing. You can start to notice possibly that your child is not wanting to go to school, even though they used to love going to school, and exploring why that is. Why are you feeling that way? What is your hesitation? And of course, if others, like other children's parents or other teachers or other caregivers, are also reporting that similar things are being experienced or said, could be a sign that something is going on. But sometimes it's important to just believe, your child and trust what they're telling you has truth to it that you should explore and look into. So definitely recognizing the signs and following through is very important. As we've been talking about throughout, a lot of this is about documenting. And that's really hard to do when you are going through a stressful situation, but so important to do. And often what we tell our clients, really in a lot of different situations as lawyers, is we tell them to contemporaneously record, in a journal, what's happening. And that's really true for these situations as well. So sometimes for parents, I suggest using the calendar, even if it's just writing down little notes on the calendar for each day when you're hearing a certain complaint from your child or a certain experience. But of course, if you have a notebook or a journal and you can write more details, that's better. Here are some of the details we think would be really important to include if possible. And that is about sort of the WH questions. When did it happen? Who was it? And what was said, what was experienced, as specifically as you can, spell it out, where it happened, if there were any witnesses, any friends or peers, nearby watching it, or a teacher or other staff at the school seeing it firsthand, whom the student told about the bullying. If you talk to your child and you're hearing, that they did tell the teacher, recording that, or if the child told someone else they trust, like the guidance counselor, recording that is really important. And certainly making a report of all of this and the response that was given, if possible. So keeping really any and all of these records and keeping them every time they happen and reporting them every time is really important. Next slide. So finding out what is the right way to make the report. So there's really, there are lots of different ways to make the report, following your school's policies first and foremost, if you can. But at the end of the day, there are other sort of templates that we would suggest you use, and they are included with the bullying and harassment guide. But one mechanism we suggest that parents use when in doubt, if they cannot figure out in their policy who is that exact person to report to, is something that we call a GEBSR letter. So it's really based off of the U.S. Supreme Court case. So basically providing notice to the superintendent of the school, while also providing that notice to the principal of the school. And we have a template sample letter in our bullying and harassment guide to use, but basically writing some of the things in that previous slide out, for that superintendent to take note of. These are the incidents that are happening, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and how often they're happening. And you're asking the school to take action and to create a safety plan or to take next steps to address the bullying issue or the harassment issue. And you can make that clear ask. What are you wanting to happen in that letter? Or whatever that process is for reporting that to the school. Again, reminding folks that if there is knowledge, then the superintendent, the principal, the building staff and personnel have to take next steps. They have to show that they took those next steps. So that's really important. And following up if a parent feels no next steps have been taken, then following up again and asking what next steps have been taken. If a student, and it is common that students with disabilities are impacted by bullying and harassment, or students who have Section 504 plans for medical conditions or other reasons, it's not uncommon for these students to be facing bullying and harassment. So it's important to also think about your rights under those other sets of laws, which we just touched on, but our bullying and harassment guide more explicitly gives examples of what you can do if you're the parent of a student with a disability. And that is that you could ask for the IEP team or the 504 team for that child to come together and to discuss this problem. Because even if the bullying is not related to their disability, or if it is, you can certainly require next steps to be taken because that issue needs to be addressed. If not, it could deny that child a free appropriate public education under those sets of federal laws. So that is another mechanism by which parents can call a team to come together and put in writing in that child's IEP and that concerns of the parent part of that IEP document and make it known, this is what my child is experiencing firsthand, and I'm asking this team to take next steps. And that IEP team or 504 plan could address the bullying and harassment in different ways. We recommend, if nothing else, if a parent or student doesn't feel that their concerns in writing, after being presented to the district, submitted to the district, are not being heard, we do recommend possibly testifying before the school board about those concerns during the public comment time, or following the process by which to be able to give that testimony. That's a very personal decision to make, but one that may be really helpful in actually moving a district to take next steps depending on the situation. In our experience, we think boards do want to hear about these concerns and issues and do want to ensure they're being addressed. And by the way, we also include a template for how to go about really any of these processes, any of these next steps in our guide, including—
I don't think we realized we would be plugging it so much.
I know, am I plugging it a lot? Yeah.
No, these are, I hope everyone can look at it because there are actually a lot of good resources there. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I think it's actually really good that you're referring back to it. I'm actually making a list of these important points to direct our viewers to. It's really helpful.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's really the sequel to this presentation, so hopefully everyone can look at it. But I just sorry.
No, thank you. One of the other ways to complain about concerns with bullying and harassment that go unaddressed include filing a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. And again, we do include a link for how to go about doing that in our guide. But Hopi also alluded to earlier, really it might require, these situations might require a parent to consider emotional or mental health support for your child. And the school may make those recommendations as part of addressing the underlying issue and may have referrals to those resources as well. So definitely keep sort of the big picture in mind for how to support the child, especially if there is a delay in any way for really addressing this underlying issue. And I think we're going to move into FAQs. Hopi, did you want to take this section or?
Yeah, the resources are not on the following slide, but we do have a slide with some resources.
We do, yes.
Yeah, and these FAQs are really just in just thinking about if there are, questions that might be particularly relevant for CAIR's members. Actually pulled some of these from from CAIR California. So we just wanted to, preview some of this. So a question that a parent or a student might have is whether they're able to wear either a hijab or a kufi or a different, garment that is associated with their religious belief, even if there's a dress code? And the answer is yes. In addition, they can't be forced to remove that garment. So if there's something like swimming that a school is requiring, a school has to provide an alternative. Can a school penalize a student for missing school on religious holidays? No. We all know that there are not a lot of religious holidays that are recognized by schools, but that doesn't mean you can't still celebrate. So we would recommend requesting the day off in advance for the holiday, and that will not be counted against your student. Students can also pray during the school day, either individually or with a group. And like we mentioned earlier, Missouri actually has a pretty explicit law that allows prayer in public schools. We would just say it's advisable if you choose a time that doesn't coincide with school or class activities, just to make it easy as possible on the student. A school doesn't have to provide like a designated room for prayer, but they can, and then they might indicate like where in the school building a student could go for that. And like we talked about earlier, student groups that are religious student groups in a public school, like, still get the same access to school facilities as other groups. They might just have timing rules. So just like other extracurriculars or other clubs, often that they might meet before or after school, but they should have the same status as other clubs.
I have a question. I'm sorry. The holiday, requesting a day off because of a religious holiday, would that day off go against your attendance?
My understanding is that can be an excused absence. So it would still be, it's still a day that they're not in school, but just like for, a doctor's note or something, it should be.
Because I always remember when I was in school, because of like the Ramadan and Eid and the days not being fixed and not being recognized in schools here, I would never get the perfect attendance board because it would go against that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's still, and Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that it's still an absence, but it's an excused absence. Is that your understanding, Amanda?
Yeah, I think it is. But I do know, schools are moving towards, making certain religious holidays, holidays and days off. And I think that is the direction we hope to see more schools go, for exactly the reasons that you're pointing out, because even though it's even though it's an excused absence, it could count against your perfect attendance award. And that's, unfair. But I would say that they should be thinking about that, right? Thinking about how that might impact certain groups of students, and that may become problematic. But I think for the most part, yeah.
Eid is like one day.
Yeah.
Right.
Just one day even.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think there are some districts that are moving toward that.
I know one school district recognized the Eid holiday. I forgot the name.
Melville.
Oh, okay.
MEHL. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they have a pretty big community of Muslims. That's why.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's, if maybe it's worth asking or bringing up if your school district doesn't already, recognize that. You could see if there's some room for advocacy, like sharing, how it affected your attendance and other things. So encourage that. And then again, there are that slide that we had that covers a lot of different laws that protect religious expression. That could be in terms of like what a student is writing about in their homework or in artwork. Schools can't discriminate based on like the content of what a student is expressing in their work. Similarly, a school can't discriminate based on clothing, accessories, jewelry that has a religious message or a religious symbol. There might be other, rules about dress code that you would want to follow. Like, I guess if there's like a length limit. I know a lot of districts are reevaluating their dress codes in general, but if it's the religious messaging that is prohibiting a student from wearing something, that's not okay. They would have the same right to express themselves in that way as with any other type of clothing, accessories, or jewelry. And this actually, this is from the Missouri Student Religious Liberties Act. So check that out if you are interested in learning more. It sort of explicitly states some of those additional protections. And I think that's it for FAQs. This slide has a lot of resources, but all of these are in our bullying guide. It's like we're just like plugging it left and right, but they are all there, so that could actually be an easier way to look at them. Like Amanda was saying, we have like a list of, for all the districts that are in St. Louis City and County, we have already laid out for you some of the contact information and links. So that's a helpful place to look. But Missouri's Department of Elementary and Secondary Education also has some resources on their website. And there are a couple of reporting hotlines as well that you can utilize. So we just wanted to leave you also with our hotline number for the Education Justice Program. You can also email us at ejp@lsem.org. And we again hope this was helpful. Hope that there's that overview that makes parents and students feel empowered just to know what your rights are. But we are happy to also answer any questions if there were some that came up.
Okay, so yeah, we do have a couple of questions. Do you have any bullying class action lawsuits going on right now?
So we do not, we actually can't do class actions because of our funding at Legal Services. Amanda, do you know of any that are happening?
Yeah, I don't know of any current, anything currently certainly not in Missouri happening. So I would say nothing that I know of here locally in the state of Missouri around bullying or harassment. No.
What kind of, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think occasionally there are like sort of high profile case, lawsuits that end up in the newspaper. I don't know of any that are class actions, but this is something that like attorneys in the private bar litigate on sometimes.
What is Bridge to Hope?
Oh no, did that come up somewhere? Was it just?
I think one of our other community partners was listed somewhere within the PowerPoint. So Bridge to Hope is just one of our other community partners that helps with parents and students navigating public education.
We did a bullying presentation to them. So I was just worried, did you see all of my notes? Yeah, we've just also talked with them about this as a community partner.
Can a school board be sued?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what are some of the success stories that you have had in the past year or so in terms of bullying and kind of getting schools to address and change their policies?
Well, I think the guide that we've developed is the biggest thing that we've done in the last year on bullying and harassment. Like I kind of mentioned at the beginning, we don't for various reasons, we don't often take on a lot of cases that are directly about this, but because this can overlap with some of the other advocacy that we do, like around school discipline, for example, like some oftentimes a student who is being disciplined for a behavior maybe was reacting because they were bullied. So there's room for us to advocate on that. I would say that some districts are, reconsidering like restorative practices. And so sometimes that could involve, a student who is experiencing bullying and someone who is doing the bullying. But that's not something that we've like directly worked on. I don't know, Amanda, do you have anything else?
I mean, all I would say really is tell us your stories, tell us what you're seeing and experiencing, firsthand, because that might, lead to some next steps that we could take. But we need to hear from you to hear what you're seeing firsthand and what you're experiencing, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to get a feel of like, what kind of cases are you guys working on right now in this area?
Right. We're not working on any impact litigation or any individual cases currently around bullying and harassment.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Why are students of color more susceptible to bullying?
Well, I think bullying, can affect any student, and there's probably a lot of different reasons. I don't know if I would necessarily say susceptible, but they're affected in different rates. There's probably a lot of different theories about that. In part, just we have a society that has a lot of injustice and oppression against people of color, and so that can look different depending on a student's exact identity. I think that the statistic that we had up on that screen, I think what's interesting is that year was like 2016, 2017. I think there's probably some cultural shifts that were happening around that time that maybe led to students using more harassment or bullying. So I think there's a lot of reasons, but Amanda, did you have anything to add about that? I mean, there's definitely, in Missouri in particular, there's a history of racism in a lot of our systems, including education. So that's a simple
if you don't mind answering one more question, what is more prevalent, bullying by fellow students or bullying by teachers?
I think we would probably students. Amanda, would you say that?
Yeah, I would agree. Probably student to student bullying or harassment, but I do think a lot of parents and students feel that schools are not doing enough to address the issue, and thus, creating that environment by which they feel, the teachers are not helping, or the superintendent isn't helping, or the district isn't helping.
We had that experience where we, like me for middle school, we reached out to them and we didn't get much of a response from the superintendent or the board. So.
Sorry that you experienced that.
I mean, not me personally. It was a community member. I forgot where they were from, Sana, Somalia, or but yeah, the child was having a lot of issues, and yeah, we didn't get much of a response. We didn't know if they did anything to address the issue, so that was kind of disappointing.
And we can talk more offline if that issue is still ongoing. Maybe you could, send that family our way and we could talk with them about the situation.
But can that, can you still pursue that case even the investigation has been done and everything?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was several months ago, but yeah, I mean, I think if we were able to put you in contact with that particular parent, they still might want to do something.
Yeah.
Last question. Why does Missouri have a higher average than the national average of bullying?
I don't know.
Really? It's just, okay.
Well, we could look back at that report that found that, but I don't know. Amanda, do you have a theory?
I do have a theory. I mean, I think a lot more can be done in the area of education equity in Missouri. And it does not surprise me that parents and students don't feel that things aren't happening in terms of, you know, legal rights being protected and ensuring a safe and secure environment. We do hear that a lot in all different aspects of the work that we do. So that's just my theory, is that we could be thinking about what are some additional legal protections in lots of different ways.
I think we're good on the question.
Those are good questions, everyone.
Huma, did you want to add anything?
No, you guys answered most of my questions. Thank you so much.
Before you guys log off, I just want to say thank you for everyone who joined us and for answering the questions. Okay. Gonna stop this live.